Frederick Bastiat wrote this book called The Law. It's very short. It's extremely easy to read, but it makes very clear what we're talking about when we're talking about the law. Another excellent book, a little harder to get, but really quite good. It's called Nazi Justice, Justiz, Nazi Justice. That's written by Richard Lawrence Miller. I believe it's still available. I read that, and I wrote a comprehensive review of that for one of our Bill of Rights Sentinel issues some years ago. And I've also myself written an article recently that talk about how Nazi principles were applied to gun control laws, so-called gun control laws. And that article should be available too. Another good book is by Paul Craig Roberts. Many people have heard of him, and a co-author. He's a nationally syndicated columnist, and his book is called The Tyranny of Good Intentions. It's a relatively current book. It talks about a lot of important concepts that we're talking about here. And another book known to some people, it's still available, by Ludwig von Mises, M-I-S-E-S, von Mises, and it's entitled simply Bureaucracy. Those are all books that if people could sit down and read, none of them is a long book, but people will get a real sense of what we're talking about here.
I can't let you get away with not mentioning The State versus the People.
Oh, of course.
The Rise of the American Police State by Claire Wolfe and myself.
Oh, absolutely.
Not a short book. It's long, but it's only 500 and some pages.
Yeah.
But it tells you more than you ever wanted to know about what's wrong in America.
No, that's a very good book, and it's actually very easy to read, too.
This is Talkin' to America with our guest, Richard Stevens. Here once again is your host, Aaron Zellman.
Another question I have for you is that there's a vintage song that we hear on the radio occasionally. The refrain is, I fought the law and the law won.
Yeah.
Does that song lyric make any sense with what you were talking about?
Yeah. Again, remember our initial question was, which is more dangerous, the legislature, the Congress and Senate, or the law itself? And that song, I fought the law and the law won, that song explains in a very simple way how we view the law. The law is not, the song is not about I fought the Congress, or I fought the judge, or I fought the police. But people come to view the whole system, rules and enforcement, as the law. So bad guys might see themselves as fighting the law, not an individual, but the whole system. And that's the important thing to point out. For good or ill, the law is a whole system. And that's what I think people need to be most concerned about.
I think it'd be good to clarify something. There might be some people who think that you're against having laws and against having governments. Based on what you're saying, how would you explain that to people?
Oh, no, I'm not, in fact, against laws, and I'm not against government. What I am is called a classical liberal. I come from the classical liberal tradition, and that is the tradition that led Thomas Jefferson to write in the Declaration of Independence that the people have unalienable rights, and that the people create the governments to protect those rights, the right to life and liberty and property implicitly there, and also the right of the people to create a legal environment of justice and equality before the law. That's the whole message of the first part of the Declaration of Independence, states those views. And that's not an anti-government or anti-law position. That's a pro-government and pro-law position, but it comes from a position of natural rights of man. So I look at it as governments work for the people. People don't work for the government. That's a very American concept, and that's one that I adopt. And I think that laws ought to be enacted that create an environment where the laws are not intrusive. They don't ruin your life. And you also don't have laws that favor one group at the expense of another. I'm looking at a society, a good society, as one that sustains harmony, abundance, and self-government. I think the law can do that.
Well, okay, let's shift the focus a little bit. Let's move away from the law and talk about lawmen. Do you tend to support the police, or do you tend to be critical and oppose the police?
That's a really good question. In fact, over the years, I've had to face this one because people have taken some of what I've said as seeming to be anti-police, and not at all. I believe the proper function of the law, the system of laws, the law, is primarily to keep the peace. And that's key. Now, keep the peace. Keeping the peace means protecting life, protecting property, protecting liberty of each individual citizen. Keeping the peace, that means deterring aggressors and imprisoning aggressors when you catch them. So I fully support the police as peace officers. Peace officers, that's the word that used to be used all the time. And peace officers keep the peace. Being a peace officer is a very tough job, and I believe quite frankly, that honest and effective peace officers ought to be paid a lot better than they are in most towns and cities. So no, I'm not anti-police at all. I'm a pro peace officer.
Well, you get my vote for that. Tell us, how about all of the various law enforcement agencies and their agents? How do they fit into the law?
Well, Aaron, this is going to take a little explaining, but it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about. We've gone through a period of political correctness, and we tend to adopt new language for things. We don't call people trash men; we call them sanitation engineers. We've changed the language over the last 20 or 30 years a lot, and this is what's happened. So that people don't understand, I think, what I'm going to say unless I explain it carefully. I'm very suspicious of the concept of law enforcement, the term law enforcement. Every American ought to be concerned about law enforcement, and here's why. When you're keeping the peace as a peace officer, like I was explaining a moment ago, your job is to protect life, liberty, property. You're there to promote the harmony among the people and to catch and put away the bad guys, the guys who kill, steal, injure, damage, defraud, or harass innocent people. That's your job as a peace officer. But now here's the shift. When you're enforcing the law, you have a different mission. Some authority will tell you as a law officer what the laws are, and then you go out and make sure people are obeying the laws. See the difference there? A law enforcement agency makes sure people obey. It's a very different message from the one of the peace officer. So now, if you have a system of laws, if the laws are bad, if the laws are unjust, if they deny fundamental human rights, that doesn't make any difference to the law enforcement agency because that agency's job is to enforce the laws, make people obey. Now, here's an example that this kind of thing happens a lot, especially, again, if you have teenage boys, as I do. Things like this come up with them or their friends. Here's a real situation. Supposing you're out shooting targets on private land on some nice Sunday afternoon, and the owner of the land finds out about it and they don't like it. So they call the police, and the local peace officer comes out. And he comes up to you, you're 17 years old, and you're out there shooting your .22 if it's legal. And the officer comes up to you and talks to you and finds out you didn't really realize you were not on, legal land and it wasn't legal and all that. And you tell him you're the kid. You tell the peace officer, okay, I'll stop, we'll pack up and we'll leave. Well, a peace officer might just thank you and warn you that, look, if you do this again, you could be in some serious trouble, but just don't do it again. Now, that's the model of a peace officer, keeping the peace, making sure you don't violate the property rights of others, but not creating special problems for you either. Just, resolve the problem. But now let's look at the way a law enforcement agent from a federal agency is likely to view this. A law enforcement agent's job is to enforce federal gun laws, for example. Now, that agent gets career credit. He gets points for the number of people he arrests and gets convicted. That's how those people are tracked. That's how you can tell whether you have a successful agent or not, is how many people he's arrested, how many he's gotten convicted. Now, that agent's motivation is not to protect life and property. His motivation is to carry out orders, to catch people who violate the law, and then make sure those people are prosecuted. So, federal agent catches you doing this kind of thing. Federal agent now has an opportunity to increase his statistics of how many people he's caught. And he's much more likely to want to bring charges against you for violating some law about firearms, even though you're not endangering anybody or damaging anybody's life or property or any other right. And that's a key thing to understand, the difference between peace officer and law enforcement officer.